Hello my lovelies, and welcome back to my channel. Happy Disability Pride Month. It's so exciting to have you here. Today I'm going to be doing a book review in honor of Disability Pride Month about a person who has a spinal cord injury called How to Walk Away by Katherine Center. It is written by an able-bodied author, but we'll be talking about that in today's video. It's been on my shelf since 2018, so I definitely thought it was time to read it. If you are new to my channel, my name is Isa and I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user and disability scholar and advocate. And I am so excited to have you here today. Before we jump into today's book, I do want to make it clear that because I'm an ambulatory wheelchair user and I have chronic illnesses and that's why I use a wheelchair, my experience is not exactly the same as the character in this book, and my relationship to my wheelchair may be slightly different, and so my analysis may not fully reflect someone who has a spinal cord injury and their relationship with this book, and I just want to make that clear. However, I am coming from a disability scholar and advocate perspective as well. So what that means is just kind of take everything that I say about this book with a grain of salt, and if you have a spinal cord injury, please feel free to correct me. I am always willing to learn, and I want to make sure that I can provide the most accurate information as possible. So let's jump in to How to Walk Away. So I gave How to Walk Away as a book probably about 2.5 stars. However, I was really impressed with the disability representation and kind of the conversations going on, especially from an able-bodied author. So I gave it 3 stars for that. There's still a lot of improvement, which we'll be talking about as we go through the book review. But before we get started in the book review, I do want to give you a brief synopsis. So, How to Walk Away is about a woman who, on the day of her proposal, gets in an accident and suffers a spinal cord injury. And 2/3 of the book, I would say, if not more, she's spending in inpatient rehab for her spinal cord injury, and it's about her relationship with her injury. It is also kind of classified, it is a romance book, and we'll be talking about that romance element in just a second. I also want to provide a disclaimer from here, because I'm going to be providing an in-depth analysis of the book. If you want a spoiler-free conversation, this is probably not the best video for you because I will be talking about specific details from the book. The first thing I wanted to show you was my tabbing system. I did blue for things that I was very uncomfortable with on like a sexism kind of level, and then pink was ableism, both in the book and then just some descriptions that I didn't agree with, so if it's from another character and if it may have come from the author itself, internalized ableism and stuff. And then orange were the parts that I actually enjoyed, something I laughed at, something that I thought was profound. And when I jumped into this book, I didn't expect to see a lot of orange. But I'm rather pleased with some of these parts, some of the book. At the beginning of this book, Center does provide the acknowledgments where she talks about all the research that she did, and I will say that I was surprised to find that she actually acknowledged 2 people who have spinal cord injuries, which is really nice to see. You don't see that a lot with able-bodied authors, especially in romance, writing characters who have experienced disability, that the research, in particular some books that I could list, authors just don't do a lot of research and they just kind of go off of the other fictionalized ideals and romanticism of disability. So that was really nice to see. However, most of the research that Center does and talks about comes from a place of the medical understanding of disability. What that means is that while she may have a somewhat accurate representation of spinal cord injuries, she uses a lot of muscle terminology, she uses medical terminology, and from my understanding, and I don't have a spinal cord injury, so I can't tell you exactly if it's 100% correct or not, but from my understanding, it's pretty okay. There were physical therapists in the reviews who said that there's a lot of accurate information in there. But what that meant is that she had a very restricted observation of what it was actually like to be a disabled person and to become disabled through a traumatic event that causes a spinal cord injury. Basically what this means for us is that we get a book that's kind of half aware. So there are parts where she's fighting stereotypes that are very important to fight, like the magical cure. Our main character in this story does not get magically cured, which is incredible and refreshing to see. It was one of the things that I really enjoyed about the book. That it breaks down some of the stereotypes around the toxic positivity and doesn't fall into some of the inspiration porny things that we normally see in romance books like this. The book didn't glorify our main character's parents and the people around her. It didn't romanticize them as some grand hero. It also provided ample conflict that was outside of the realm of the physical injury that kind of just intersected with our main character's story. That was really also very refreshing to see. One of my favorite parts of the entire book is actually a place where it was a victory that I kind of saw myself in for a different situation where she doesn't know if she can use the bathroom by herself and or without using a catheter, and she does, and she's celebrating, and the people around her are celebrating, and her sister is celebrating, but even in that moment she's controlling what's going on. It's a very high agency situation. She's not patronized. It's just a very solid celebration of something that she thought her body may not be able to do, and she's very thankful that she is able to do it. And it's celebrated in a way that I think a lot of the positive elements of this book are just refreshing, which is why I gave it such a high score for being a disability book written by an able-bodied author. Now, all of that said, we gotta get into why this book is problematic. The biggest problem with the book over anything else is that the romance is between our main character, who has a spinal cord injury, and her physical therapist, which is incredibly inappropriate. It's not just unprofessional, but it's completely unsafe. Women with disabilities, and especially those who are more intersectional than our main character, are constantly at risk of being sexually harassed and sexually assaulted, especially by those who are in caretaking roles, especially when you're in a fragile state after an injury. It is just really upsetting that a character is romanticized, such as her physical therapist, who should be held responsible for what he did in creating that relationship, even though he tried to keep it off and holding back his feelings for her. Like, overall, relationships with a physical therapist, your physical therapist, the physical therapist should shut that down immediately, and this character fails to do so. And when he does try, does a terrible job, and I could probably go on forever about how scary this situation in real life actually is. And that's my biggest complaint about the book overall, is that this romance in itself is just deeply terrifying on a practical level. Aside from that, Center, the author, doesn't have the nuance and understanding of disability that allows her to provide it doesn't provide her the tools to provide commentary on some delicate subjects. In the book, there's a huge section that's talking, and it comes back to it a lot because the main character is engaged at the beginning of the book to a different character, and it talks a lot about desire and sexual attraction, and if you're going to be able to have sex again. And in doing so, there's these people around her that are talking about how disabled women are not considered sexually attractive anymore, and that like all of these terrible stereotypes. It does address the fact that a lot of people, especially women who have spinal cord injuries, are able to have sex, but it does it in a way, and it references articles without actually providing any real annotation for people to research, and they're not going to research. So it felt like it kind of stomped all over somewhat of a not quite delicate topic, but one that is just laced with a lot of stigma and stereotyping already, and so it was just kind of difficult to navigate those waters. Even if you are a disabled author, I think that would be difficult, but this author just really didn't have that understanding of that nuance. Another thing I really didn't like is that early in the book, her fiance who caused the injury came in completely drunk and said that her face looked like pizza. So he was studying my face. You used to be so beautiful and now you look like pizza. He made himself laugh with that one, and Nina and I stared as he doubled over for a second and hung from his waist, his shoulders shaking with chuckles. But I kissed you anyway because you, here he held up an imaginary glass of toast, are the love of my life. Yeah. Even though that this character is highly villainized throughout the book, he's really an awful character. There's a huge section of characters in this book that are just walking, talking ableist assholes. And the mom is talking about how she looks ugly and she's not beautiful anymore. And it feels like it was written for an able-bodied audience to go, here is an example of what a bad person is. Don't be this person. Completely disregarding the fact that there may be disabled people reading this. There may be someone who has severe scarring on their face and they're already self-conscious about it, and then you have all these characters come in and say how ugly she is, and then at the crux of it is that her scars are hidden and she just had a sunburn like thing on her face, and that she was still able to remain beautiful. And just that whole thing, it's just very this is a lesson in ableism, and it makes it very uncomfortable space for actually disabled people to read that type of thing. Another issue I had with this book was the description of the wheelchair. We don't really get a strong description of any wheelchair. There is a wheelchair that she uses in the hospital that she's expected to be able to use almost instantly, and there is a moment where her physical therapist stops and tries to teach her how to use a wheelchair, and that's kind of a cool moment because there is a learning process to using a wheelchair and how to not exhaust yourself. I have a manual wheelchair, and that was a huge learning curve for me. However, hospital wheelchairs are very, very different than a custom-made manual wheelchair, even a non-custom-made manual wheelchair. And I really wish we got some description to kind of know what she was using, because it did not provide a clear description. She's in a hospital, so it makes it sound like she's using a hospital wheelchair, but she's using it like if it was a manual wheelchair without the arm sides and easier to use. It's weird. And I don't know if it's from my misunderstanding or if it's because the author didn't know. So I just really wish some more description was in there to really understand that nuance of becoming a wheelchair user. Another element of being a wheelchair user that I really didn't like that they ignored is that it completely disregarded any aches and pains. It didn't talk about any chronic pain issues that she probably has. She just kind of gets thrown places and picked up willy-nilly, and it's romanticized being randomly picked up by people around her, and it's just very uncomfortable, especially when you don't have control over who and how and when someone moves you when you're in a wheelchair, and it's just leaves a gross taste in my mouth and doesn't actually represent what it's like to be a wheelchair user even after you recover from a significant illness or an injury. Is that a lot of times you experience chronic pain issues still, and that just kind of contradicts this whole research thing that we get at the beginning of the book, and towards the end it just kind of is oh, she can't walk and that's her only symptom. The next problem I had with this book is that it, for the most part, left Margaret out of what was going on with her body. People would tell her to do things without explaining why. Doctors would talk to her parents and her family before they talked to her, and some of that's standard, but it was never addressed as a problem. And it was just kind of, she's blindly moving throughout the world and no one's telling her anything, and it just was one of the things that kind of took away the agency of the character, and it made me, again, bad taste in my mouth. It's gross. It's just a gross thing. The next thing I had a problem with is the fact that this book never once used the word disability or disabled. It did use able-bodied to describe the people around her, but never like classified her as disabled. And while not all wheelchair users consider themselves disabled, I would have really liked to see at least some acknowledgement, even if it was a rejection of the term disabled, to be able to say like where she stands with the disability identity. And in addition to that, we never got to meet another person who had a spinal cord injury. We never met another wheelchair user that actually talked. And so what that meant for us is that our only experience for wheelchairs comes from, and the character's only experience of disability in wheelchairs comes from her own experience. And we just need to stop considering disability and wheelchair use and all of these things as like an individual experience and start understanding them as a cultural experience, because of the disability community being such a big part, especially since social media was a large part of this book. We're online. You have found my YouTube. I have found so many other disabled people's YouTubes. That was the first thing I did when I became a wheelchair user, is I looked up other wheelchair users to see what their experience was like. And it just was really strange that she's doing all this research and never came into contact with another disabled person. And it just kind of left the disability experience for the reader to seem monolithic. So that's my review for How to Walk Away by Katherine Center. Overall, I was surprised by how much there were parts that I did like, and I know it didn't sound like a lot after I complained about a lot of it, and ultimately there was a lot of narrative things that I had to take into consideration when I gave it its stars. But I do think Katherine Center did put her best foot forward. I'm not mad at the work that she did, I just think it needs to go a step further. So if you are an able-bodied person trying to write disabled characters, the two biggest things I can tell you is just start looking at disability as a cultural experience. Look at how disabled people teach disabled people, because that's ultimately when we start making sense of our world, and also take in consideration that disability is an identity, and that process of adopting or rejecting the disability identity is super important when someone enters the disability community. So those are my thoughts. Happy Disability Pride Month. I hope that I will be able to give you some good book recommendations soon, or something, I don't know. We'll see what happens throughout the summer and throughout July. But overall, thank you for coming to my channel. If you want to continue to see this chaos, then make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you real soon.